It began without sirens, no alerts, no distress pings, no final comms or orbital flashes. 5 human colonies, Dravik Reach, Bastion 12, Coal Station, Harrowline, and Hestel's Wake, vanished from the Spiral Concord's central registry within 47 seconds of each other. Each site was remote, underdefended, and administratively minor, useful for trade relays, agricultural offsets, and cold storage. Their disappearance wasn't military. There were no troop movements or declared engagements. Their quantum IDs were wiped, routing maps rerouted. Their diplomatic entries marked invalid path reference. Earth's outer stations noticed the silence within hours. But by then, the system had already adapted to the loss, as if they'd never existed. The Spiral Treaty Sphere spanned 83 species, a lattice of legal interdependence and economic algorithms bound under the Concord, a treaty matrix forged after the Cataclysm reconciliations nearly 2 centuries ago. For younger species, like Earth, entrance had come through observation first, then probationary membership. Full voting rights remained decades away, but Earth's presence had steadily grown through trade logic audits and minor legal review. Still, it remained vulnerable, its position valid only so long as its registry alignment held. When the colonies disappeared from Concord recognition, Earth filed a Class 5 diplomatic incident notice. It was flagged, queued, then quietly archived. The Karari Imperium, senior delegates of the treaty's Western Quorum, responded within 72 hours. They called the registry anomaly a localized entropy failure, blamed electromagnetic drift in Earth's entanglement arrays, and suggested a systems recalibration exercise. When Earth's ambassador presented data logs proving entanglement integrity, Korari counselor Ver Malin laughed, on record. "Your panic over clerical anoma, lies," he said, "is unbecoming of a species still awaiting its second cycle validation. If you must invent mythologies to soothe your anxiety, please leave them off the docket." Later, in a closed session leak, a term surfaced in the Korari advisory notes: fabricated myth. It referred not only to the colony's disappearance, but to the clause Earth had long insisted existed in the treaty's sub-logic root, Clause 47, or what Earth called Protocol Null Prime. The term was used derisively. Most in the Council dismissed the idea entirely. After all, no one alive had ever seen the clause activated. Some argued it had never existed. But it had. Decades earlier, during Earth's observation era, the clause had been inserted by a man no longer in the public record. Admiral Rain Kessel, former architect of Earth's treaty compliance protocols, strategist of the Pendrick simulations, and the one credited internally with Earth's ascension beyond planetary jurisdiction, had vanished during the final years of Earth's treaty negotiations. His last known statement had been a private transmission to Earth's Strategic Lawfare Division. Structural logic isn't negotiated, it's planted. Officially, he'd been declared dead after a failed re-entry maneuver over iOS orbit. Unofficially, his exit had been by design. Far from the luminous pathways of treaty governance and system-wide capital hubs, deep within the gravitational isolation zone of the Farsync lattice, a sprawling autonomous array of ancient observatories left by an extinct race, Kessel continued his work. He no longer held rank. No state sanctioned his presence. His terminal access had long since been revoked. But Farsync was a ghost net, untouched by council audits, its data channels still intact under manual interface, and Kessel used them. He had watched silently as species traded recognition favors in exchange for corridor rights. He'd mapped each shift in protocol weighting, traced the misuse of registry timestamps, tracked how vote stacking enabled the slow drift of legal definitions. He had known it would come to this. The Concord wasn't collapsing. It was decaying. From the inside, through logic erosion, quorum drift, and blind faith in procedural transparency. And now, 5 colonies had been erased, without a weapon fired, without a single hull breached, by strategic consensus denial. Kessel didn't move when the data stream finalized. The colony deletions were subtle, procedural. the work of someone who understood not just the treaty, but the automation layers beneath it. This wasn't a brute force attack. This was surgical obscurity, likely done through lattice signal dampening and consensus shadow writing, tools only a handful of species could deploy with such precision. The Korari had not made a mistake. They had issued a warning. On his console, Kessel brought up the archival sublogic of the Concord, his copy, not the public one, redundant, compartmentalized, and manually verified for drift every 5 cycles. In it, Clause 47 still sat, untouched, inactive, surrounded by outdated formatting and obsolete syntax. A clause meant not to punish, not to retaliate, but to suspend. It could not be triggered by Earth. It had to be tripped naturally through proof of recursive manipulation against a probationary species. Kessel had designed it that way, to protect against precisely this moment. He didn't speak. He simply ran a sync trace. The treaty sphere was no longer stable. Its logic bedrock had cracked, and the Imperium thought the clause was myth. They weren't wrong. Myths don't shout. They don't announce their return. They walk in when the room is quietest and rewrite what everyone thought they understood. By the time Earth's Strategic Lawfare Division compiled its second formal appeal, the damage had calcified. Their first challenge had been buried under subclause review. The second was returned with formatting objections. The third, filed as a conditional protest to the Registry Continuity Board, was passed to Review Committee 9, chaired entirely by Korari-aligned delegates. Every layer of resistance was procedural. Nothing overt, no denials, no accusations, just weighted silence, folded inside spiral loops of legal deferral. And all the while, the 5 colonies remained non-entities, not destroyed, just unacknowledged. Ships couldn't navigate to them, aid couldn't be routed, contracts couldn't be enforced, the lattice saw nothing, and the Concord's arbitration schedule had no available hearings until the next rotational cycle, 11 months out. The tipping point came without warning. Subcommittee 12, newly convened for a sapient verification agenda, issued a motion to reclassify Earth's status within the Spiral Treaty sphere. No debate, no prior review. The term used was chillingly clinical. Provisional sapience claimant. If passed, it would strip Earth of observational voting access, revoke communication priority lanes, and reset all treaty-tied economic frameworks. It was a diplomatic execution, not by blade, but by form. Earth had less than 72 hours to mount a response. But Earth did not respond on the council floor. The Lawfare Division sealed their terminals. The legal feeds went dark. Senior analysts gathered in a subterranean vault below the Concord Relay Hub in Geneva, where no off-world audit systems could surveil protocol deployment. There, behind ceramic encryption layers older than most species' first contact records, they initiated the one directive not meant for court: doctrine null response. It had been buried long ago, part of Earth's original observer status defense scaffolding. A doctrine designed not to win arguments, but to deny the field itself. It shut down active communications with the treaty sphere. It rerouted all legal traffic through cold storage networks embedded in dormant asteroid contracts. It froze Earth's vote proxy structures. And most critically, it reactivated legacy cognitive defense protocols stored deep in the SolarNet's ghost frequency archives. Every move made Earth quieter, not louder, not retaliatory, just unreadable. One of those systems, hidden inside a dormant entanglement channel orbiting Mercury, housed a quantum repeater that hadn't pulsed since the Pendrick simulations ended. It was pre-coded with one outbound message. When triggered, it did not seek permission. It sent. And what it sent was a chain of cold format packets labeled Red Grid Breach, encoded for a specific receiver under a trust key not linked to Earth's current diplomatic structure. That receiver was Rain Kessel. Farsync didn't ring. It didn't light up. There were no alarms, just a ripple, a soft overwrite in Kessel's passive monitor field. The message decrypted without challenge. No passcode required. Its header confirmed only one thing. The Concord's entanglement route had been compromised in a manner that fit Clause 47's predictive pattern. Manipulation verified. Quorum skewed. Registry nodes erased through consensus redirection. He didn't move for several minutes. Then, slowly, he walked the circumference of the main terminal vault, keying in manual wait commands for 6 autonomous repositories. One by one, the Dominion archive came online. It was not a database. It was a full-spectrum observational framework, compiled over 47 years of passive treaty monitoring. Its input channels had been seeded through economic normalization routines, trade clauses, drift analyzers, timestamp offset trackers, and diplomatic traffic skimmers. It had no formal authorization. It had never been declared. Its existence violated no laws because it had never been asked about. Inside the archive, Kessel opened 3 primary data sets. The first tracked clause manipulations, slow revisions to sublogic scaffolds hidden beneath seemingly harmless language updates. Words changed, shall became may, advisory became binding, recorded node became recognized presence. Each edit passed unanimously. None flagged. The second data set mapped timestamp drift logs, showing how vote anchors had been moved, sometimes by nanoseconds, sometimes by minutes, to ensure quorum alignment in key procedural rulings. In a system where quorum timing determined reality, those drifts mattered more than missiles. The third and most damning dataset tracked quorum override patterning. This was where the Karari's fingerprints were clearest. Dozens of procedural outcomes, appeals, downgrades, asset denials, matched exact manipulations initiated during closed sessions. None could be proved individually, but across 40 years, the pattern was a map, a war plan without weapons. And beneath all of it, buried in obsolete syntax layers still parsed only by Earth's earliest treaty encoding systems, was Clause 47, the one no species had ever invoked, the one the Karari mocked as myth. Protocol Null Prime, a structural failsafe written into the Concord's foundation to counter recursive quorum interference against probationary states. A clause that did not require Earth to fight. It required Earth to survive long enough for the Concord to break itself. Kessel leaned over the console. The clause's trigger sat untouched, untampered, but live. He keyed in one command, an authentication string hard-coded into a courier vessel Earth had registered 46 years ago and never used. P with a diplomatic override authority embedded in its transponder, tethered directly to sublogic route verification protocols. It had been designed to activate only once, and only by one man. When the prompt appeared, deploy authority vessel, Kessel didn't hesitate. He confirmed. Above the quiet vaults of Farsync, a single ship, sleek, quiet, nearly invisible in emissions, came alive. Its navigation protocol required no destination. It only required legitimacy. And it had it. Because the system still remembered who Rain Kessel was, even if no one else did. The Council did not issue public warnings. It rarely did. But when an emergency war summit was called without the usual week-long lead, the treaty sphere noticed. Delegates across 5 sectors recalled early from border audits. Docking lanes at the Concord core gridlocked with inbound diplomatic vessels. News feeds speculated on military escalation, but no declarations had been made. No species had raised arms. The word circulating in encrypted channels wasn't attack. It was audit. A phrase far more dangerous and far harder to contain. Inside the main chamber of the Concord core, an orbital assembly platform orbiting Murnau Prime, 83 seats glowed active, with dozens more open for non-voting observers. The session was chaired by Elder Tolex of the Dralti Federation, chosen for neutrality. But all eyes were on the Karari block, seated tight and silent in a formation of calculated calm. Their lead, Councillor Vermalin, projected composure. The quiet sort of arrogance that came not from confidence, but from certainty. Certainty that the mechanisms they had shaped over decades were untouchable. That certainty cracked the moment Kessel's courier ship exited relay space without broadcast declaration and entered the diplomatic perimeter without being challenged. The ship bore no transponder, no diplomatic encryption key. It did not respond to handshakes or identification protocols. But as it breached the 300-kilometer radius around Concord Core, the treaty sphere's logic framework responded, not by alarm, but by compiling. Internal diagnostic systems began parsing sublogic records, trying to resolve a mismatch. Every delegate's terminal pinged a silent verification request, buried in the root-level clause indexing of the original Concord. Dozens dismissed the request as an error. Several failed to recognize the prompt at all. But on the 9th parsing cycle, the clause activated. It didn't declare war. It didn't even freeze systems. It simply applied its condition set. Clause 47, Protocol Null Prime, had been written as a passive fail-safe. If any recognized Concord entity was found to be recursively manipulating registry nodes against a probationary species through quorum misalignment, the clause would quarantine the offender's voting privileges and lock their recognition path until an independent verification audit completed. The system didn't accuse, it didn't explain. It just executed. The override signature tied to Kessel's identity authenticated with full legacy clearance. It matched a dormant line of the Concord last edited during Earth's observational phase, signed off by a list of now-dead delegates from now-defunct civilizations with no remaining veto power. It had never been repealed, because no one remembered it existed. The moment the clause authenticated, Korari counselors lost reply access. Not metaphorically. Their interface terminals froze. They retained red privileges, but their vote weight registered null. Counselor Malin stood mid-sentence as the override processed. His next words were not broadcast. His voice continued, but no one heard him, except the walls. A silent notification swept across the chamber. Clause 47 recognized. Recognition quarantine pending. The entire council went still. Then the Dominion archive began streaming. It hadn't come from Earth. It was preloaded into the courier's interface node, and once the override confirmed Kessel's authority, it began piping data directly into the Concord Core's legal substrate. First came timeline overlays, decades of clause edits tracked and flagged, then quorum trace logs, fingerprint collisions, override timestamps, subcommittee bias mappings. Each line of evidence was cold, not emotional, not accusatory, just consistent. One by one, delegates turned to their own terminals, watching as their vote histories were cross-verified against data they had never seen before. Some saw their support patterns mirrored perfectly within the archive, unwitting pawns in vote-bundling algorithms they had never noticed. Others saw inconsistencies in their own species' recognition logs, trade agreements approved through time-shifted registry paths. Every single anomaly pointed in one direction: the Korari Imperium. Panic moved in stages. First denial, then silence, then recalibration. Counselor Malin attempted to speak again, demanding direct control of the reply stream. The chamber denied him, automatically. The Concord's enforcement AI, designed to enforce clause logic without bias, now treated the Korari as suspended entities. Not enemies, just irrelevant. Delegates from the Brecken dynasty disconnected their feeds. The Morthal envoy requested a formal pause for internal consultation. The Vorid Confederacy moved to seat their alternate delegate, bypassing a Korari-aligned quorum delay. Each of these actions happened not out of loyalty to Earth, but out of instinct for survival. No species wanted to be linked to a logic quarantine. In the spiral sphere, perception was infrastructure, and infrastructure was everything. Then, at the bottom of every active console, the clause issued one final statement. It did not blink, it did not scroll. It was not sent from a unknown address. Recognition path inconsistent, override proceeding. No one applauded, no one moved to strike it from the record. Because for the first time in decades, the room no longer understood who held the record, or what it had become. Kessel didn't raise his voice, he didn't speak at all. He walked to the adjudication terminal at the center of the chamber as though summoned, not by request, but by design. Council security didn't stop him, not because they were ordered to stand down, but because the override layer had already sealed their authority loop. Their credentials no longer processed near him. Proximity logic rejected their clearance. As far as the system was concerned, Rain Kessel was not an intruder. He was the originating user. He placed the Dominion Archive's core node, no larger than a human hand, into the terminal's uplink cradle. It didn't spin or glow, it simply connected. The Concord's central spine recognized the dataset immediately and began synchronizing. There was no announcement, no request for review, just confirmation. One after another, nested logs unfolded into the visible layer. Decades of buried records, timestamp anomalies, and protocol drift signatures began to auto-verify against the system's own master logs. It was not an argument. It was a match test, and the match rate was perfect. Visual overlays populated each delegate's console, side-by-side comparisons of public treaty entries and their altered post-quorum versions. The alterations were not dramatic, no rewritten sentences or blatant insertions, just gradual corrosion. Language softened, definitions loosened, timings misaligned by sub-second intervals that, when strung together, redirected entire legal pathways. And every one of them led to a common benefit chain, one that mapped upward to the Corari Imperium. Councillor Malin attempted a formal rebuttal. His terminal issued a denial. Voice access restricted. Message path invalid. The override had suspended his reply stream. So he stood and addressed the chamber verbally, denouncing the archive as a mythical fabrication masquerading as data. He accused Earth of forging logs, corrupting validation layers, embedding malware into Concord's adjudication systems. But the archive had already begun its own internal self-check. The core node's secondary function activated, root layer self-verification against the immutable backup fragments distributed across the original entanglement net. The Dominion archive had never existed in a single location. It was designed as a distributed failsafe, seated in the logic redundancy of Concord's oldest code blocks. As each checksum aligned, the system displayed authentication confirmations. 100% integrity, chain unbroken, source nodes confirmed. The archive hadn't been hacked into the system. It had been waiting for its turn. Malin's accusations collapsed with each passing second. Delegates who had previously backed Corari initiatives began isolating their vote histories. Internal legal staff across multiple species activated retro-audit protocols. No one wanted to be listed on the wrong side of a clause activation, especially not one tied to falsified quorum manipulation. The spiral sphere ran OAS. In trust, yes. But more than that, it ran on precedent. And once precedent was breached, affiliation became liability. The system registered the pattern before any individual did. It parsed quorum vote metadata, recognized consolidation routes that had favored the Corari's central alignment faction, and flagged every dependent treaty for secondary review. The result came through quietly, efficiently, and without emotion. Entity: Corari Imperium. Status: pending recognition review. It wasn't an indictment. It wasn't even a punishment. It was worse. It was liminality. Recognition suspended, vote access locked, speech invalidated. Corari delegates were now present but not processed. Their feed remained open but no longer carried weight. In the treaty's legal logic, they had become conceptual ghosts. Silence overtook the chamber, the kind that didn't come from shock but from acceleration. Too many trajectories snapping at once. Every alliance, trade pact, and bilateral logic tether tied to Karari-recognized identity now faced an uncertain anchor. Delegates leaned back from their terminals. No species moved to defend the Karari, because defending them meant inheriting their risk. The terminal pinged one final override sequence. Not to Earth, not to Council leadership, to Rain Kessel. Observer Rain Kessel. Legacy path verified. Temporal speech, authority granted. No one moved. Even Malin, still standing, remained frozen, because the phrase carried weight beyond its literal function. It was a sentence that hadn't been used in the council chamber since the Concord's earliest days. It meant that the individual now held authority not as a citizen of a species, but as a structural actor, someone with rights embedded in the treaty itself. Kessel didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. The override had spoken already, the archive had spoken already, and the clause had rewritten the landscape without force, without armies, without even an official statement from Earth's current government. The chamber's displays dimmed. One by one, auxiliary systems flickered to a single unified message. It did not scroll, it did not elaborate. Protocol null prime. Active. That was all. And in the silence that followed, every species in the treaty sphere began to reconsider what they thought Earth was, or what it had ever been. Within a single council cycle, the Spiral Treaty Corps initiated a galaxy-wide alert sequence. It wasn't delivered as a broadcast. It arrived embedded in system updates, slipped beneath advisory layers into protocol compliance queues, and deployed through logic validation networks without diplomatic flair. The message was stripped of commentary. It simply read, Clause 47 suspension confirmed, quorum violation ongoing. Recognition status pending for one entity. No names were mentioned, but no one needed them. The attached hash signature pointed to one source, the Korari Imperium. Treaty-aligned species reacted not with declarations or outrage, but with protocol. The moment the alert time-stamped, their automated governance systems began disassociating Korari credentials. Treaty ports suspended handshake access. Diplomatic feeds issued temporary hold notices. Quorum-linked financial institutions paused ledger tracking for all Korari-backed trade credits, freezing over 12 trillion units in transit. None of this was done out of malice. It was compliance. The Concord's legal lattice didn't distinguish intent. It processed logic. And the logic now read, recognition invalidated. In outer systems, the effects were immediate and devastating. Patrol-class Korari vessels arriving at shared waypoints were denied docking. Their navigational pings returned unverified. Defense satellites, updated with new clause compliance protocols, reclassified Korari ships as untagged actors, a designation usually reserved for failed state raiders or rogue privateers. There were no shots fired, no lock-ons, just blank screens where permissions had once lived. Their ships weren't targeted, they were ignored. The real collapse began inside their own infrastructure. Korari fleet AI command chains, reliant on lattice-based authentication for mission parameters, began failing continuity checks. Without external registry feedback, key systems stalled. Orders couldn't route. Logistics collapsed into circular requests. Subcommands issued requests to non-existent coordinators. Entire formations went into standby mode, unable to resolve if they were still commissioned. Ships designed to command space now simply drifted, waiting for a signal that no longer existed. In Allied space, things deteriorated even faster. The Brecken dynasty withdrew its support protocols. The Vorid Confederacy issued an immediate diplomatic freeze, citing clause integrity responsibilities. Port authorities canceled all upcoming Korari inbound manifests. All existing synchronization agreements, timing exchanges, regional map updates, currency harmonics were terminated. And without active synchronization, even peacekeeping convoys became liabilities. The Korari weren't enemies, but they were no longer participants. Back on Earth, No one celebrated. No parades, no addresses. A single reply was issued from Earth's Strategic Lawfare Division to the Treaty Corps, passed through the Legacy Diplomatic Archive without signature or ceremony. Clause held. That was all. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vengeance. It was a statement of completion. The system had done what it was designed to do. Earth had not built a weapon. It had built a proof, and the proof had run its course. Korari efforts to counter the narrative failed before they began. Every attempt to file counter-appeals was rejected on the basis of logic invalidation. The Dominion Archive had triggered an authentication cascade, and the system would now treat any data originating from Korari channels as inherently untrustworthy until an independent reconstruction, one requiring full disclosure of private node traffic for over 40 years. An impossibility, one they would never agree to. And so the Korari Imperium, without a single battle fought, without a single loss recorded on a kill report, found itself cut out. Not destroyed, not condemned, just missing. Their name appeared in no votes. Their treaties entered archival status. Their fleet numbers remained unchanged, but their access to relevance dissolved. They still existed. But in a system where perception dictated participation, they were no longer seen. They hadn't been beaten. They had been edited out. There was no official statement from the Council, no acknowledgement, no summary of proceedings. The incident entered the record as a logic disruption followed by a clause enforcement trigger. Rain Kessel's name never appeared in the minutes. No press release followed his override. Internally, the event was labeled under Maintenance Protocol 47A and filed as a closed audit review. The council chambers resumed schedule within the week, but the seats once occupied by Korari delegates remained vacant, not out of punishment, out of absence. Earth didn't request reinstatement. It didn't issue a counter-narrative. No delegates made statements. No ambassador appeared on spiral networks. There was nothing to campaign for. Recognition, once stripped from the Korari, didn't shift to Earth. It shifted to the system Earth had built, the logic it had preserved, the clause it had left buried until it was needed. In a structure where law was protocol and protocol was code, the origin of that code mattered more than presence, and Earth's version now ran clean. Within 3 months, 37 spiral-aligned species began reformatting their internal treaty systems. The decision wasn't ideological, it was practical. Earth's validator layer was the only one that had withstood a full-cycle recursive clause challenge without corruption. Every audit tool, every contract certification program, every registry node reliability test now ran smoother under Earth logic. The efficiency gains alone made the migration inevitable. A quiet update began rolling across systems, patches titled Legacy Validator, E-Class, Earth. It didn't stop there. Legal institutes across 3 sectors issued new certification requirements. Courses once built on conquered baseline structures now included an additional core module, Colossal Myth Recognition Protocols. It taught students how to detect long-dormant structural safeguards. It included case studies from Earth's observational era. It never named Kessel, but the code samples matched his formatting. His clause was now a teaching tool, copied line for line, explained, analyzed, preserved. The word new stopped appearing next to Earth's name in legal reviews, in quorum summaries, in trade route designation notices. Earth wasn't granted senior status. It was simply used, its logic, its audit pathways, its clause formatting. Quietly, other species stopped asking whether Earth should be trusted. They started asking whether their systems could still be trusted without it. Korari space still existed. Their ships still floated. Their people still lived, but they were unacknowledged. Not because anyone forbade their participation, but because no one had a reason to engage with a structure that didn't align anymore. Relevance had shifted. Authority had not been seized. It had been inherited by the only system that still parsed clean. In the Concord core, the chamber lights stayed dim after the last quorum adjournment of the cycle. Only one terminal remained active, Its central screen displayed a message not tied to any delegate. It wasn't interactive. It didn't respond to input. It was a statement, left there by the logic itself. Clause 47 Archive, reviewed. All inputs passed. Override complete. There were no signatures. No applause, just an empty room. And when the council systems logged the final activity of the quarter, it closed with a single annotation, generated not by any species, but by the validator itself. He was called a myth. He wrote the clause that ended theirs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY tales. Now tell us in the comments, if your species had one clause buried in galactic law, quiet, unspoken but waiting, what would it do?